welcome to Season 2 of The Office Visit, presented by Logan's World TV. I'm your host, Matt McCormick, alongside our special guest, Dr. Tom Pritchard. Dr. Tom, it wasn't that long ago that we wrapped on Season 1, and here we are back again to give the fans even more of what we gave them in Season 1, and that's unlimited wrestling knowledge.
Well, why not? I mean, Season 1 was unlimited. Let's not keep it limited here either for Season 2. I can't wait, man. I know you have a list of questions and a lot of things you want to talk about.
Absolutely, and a lot of the fans reached out to us and let us know how much they loved Season 1 and gave us some really good suggestions and questions for Season 2. And we're going to get right into it. This episode, the debut of Season 2, we're going to start with tag team wrestling. We're going to start with its importance in professional wrestling, some of the more notable, some maybe less notable tag teams, some you've heard of, some you haven't. But Dr. Tom, my first question for you is just, could you expand a little bit on the origins of tag team wrestling and the beginning of tag team wrestling?
Well, when I first heard about tag team wrestling, it was called an Australian tag team match. It was a new concept. I guess it might have been around in the 30s or 40s of professional wrestling. I'm not sure the exact year, but it was an Australian tag match, new here in the United States, where you had four men facing each other, and you had to tag one. And it was an interesting, exciting concept, which went into 6-man tag team, 4-man tag team, 8-man tag team, I guess. But it originally, I guess, originated in Australia and came over here and was very exciting for the time because it was new, it was fresh. And of course, as the years have gone by, you've seen some great tag teams, and as you said, notable and not so notable tag teams. But I've had the opportunity in my career, in my life, to be part of various tag teams and have various partners. And I know for a fact that in order to be a successful tag team, you have to be on the same page, and you have to know, get to know your partner to anticipate what he's going to do next, anticipate what he's thinking, because that's what all the great tag teams throughout the history of wrestling have done. They've always been a cohesive unit.
And we talk about wrestling being an art form, and tag team wrestling, it really is. Because like you said, you have to be on the same page with not only your partner, but your opponents as well.
Well, by all means. I mean, it does take, when you have a tag team match, there's 4 people that make the match. And one of the greatest tag team feuds or tag team combinations would have to be, and I'm just going to say this right off the bat, the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express. I mean, that was just that synergy, that combustive element of 4 guys. Actually, if you had Jim Cornette in the mix, 5 people working together for the excitement of the fans.
And we're going to talk a lot more about Rock and Roll at Midnight, but just going back to your own childhood, growing up as a wrestling fan, what were some of the earliest tag teams you can remember?
My earliest memory, especially growing up as a fan at 4 years old, I can remember a vicious, nasty-looking tag team by the name of the Von Bronner brothers. They were from Germany, and they were managed by a gentleman called Gentleman Saul Weinroth. Now, this was in the 1960s, so it wasn't that far removed from World War II. Now, you had these German, bald-headed, badass-looking Germans coming to the ring with long black tights and the sash around their chest with the swastika and Iron Cross, managed by a Jewish manager. Now, that didn't really hit me when I was a kid, but looking back on it, again, the Germans and the Jews, and that's where the heat came from a lot of times. These 2 big, bald-headed, 260, 270-pound men, managed by this weaselly little Jewish manager, Saul Weinroth, who wore a black suit, a hat, a fedora, come to the ringside, carry a cane, and it was a great combination. They looked the part, they were the part, they were mean, vicious, nasty tag team. And they worked together well. They looked similar, they could do switches in the ring, and they knew how to get heat, they knew how to get a reaction. One of my first memories of these guys, Dory Funk Jr., Dory Funk Sr., and Terry Funk, the Funks, in Texas were the heroes. They were the guys. They were the guys who wore the white hat in West Texas. And the Von Bronners came to town. Well, Saul Weinroth had been interfering in the matches, And finally, Dory Funk Sr. and Dory Jr. were going to wrestle the Von Brauners on TV. Well, it didn't happen that way. And the next week, it was going to be Dory Funk Sr. versus Saul Weingroff in a special match. And Weingroff came out and said, I'm here. I'm waiting for Dory Funk Sr. to show up. And Nick Roberts said, Dory Funk Sr. and Dory Funk Jr. have been called away to the ranch. They have work on the ranch, and they can't be here today. And Weingroff said, the reason is they're cowards. They just didn't want to show up and face me. And young Terry Funk came out and said, you'll never see the day when a Funk won't get in the ring with you. I have my wrestling gear in the back. I'll go get it on. So during the whole hour of the show, Saul Weingroff was out at the table telling everyone in West Texas what cowards the Funks are. And where's Terry Funk? I'm waiting out here for him. And wouldn't you know it, the last 5 minutes of the show, Terry Funk comes out dressed. And out comes Saul Weingroff. He's in his wrestling trunks. And the bell rings, and Terry's trying to pull Weingroff off the ropes and get him in the center of the ring. Here come these two big, bald Germans in black suits, white shirt, black tie. And they beat the hell out of Terry Funk. And Weingroff tells one of the Germans to go back to the back in the dressing room, and he comes back with scissors. And they cut Terry Funk's hair. But before that, Weingroff took out, to this day, what I think was a hatchet. Hit Terry on the side of the face, cut his ear open, and there's blood running down from the ear of Terry Funk. And the Von Brauners are chopping Terry Funk's hair off. And that led to a huge tag match between the Von Brauners against the Funk brothers, and then you add Dory Funk Sr. in the mix and Saul Weingroff in the mix. You had a 6-man tag match. So I remember in West Texas especially, tag teams coming in, big, bad-looking tag teams. Another tag team was the Infernos with J.C. Dykes. And they were masked, and they were mysterious, and they were from Europe. The Masked Infernos from Europe, managed by J.C. Dykes. And J.C. Dykes carried a canteen to ringside with him. And he would give his Infernos instructions by blowing a whistle at ringside. And then all the fans would come to the matches with whistles and blow the whistle same time JC would, and his boys would get confused, and things like that happened. And they would throw fire, and one of the Infernos had a loaded boot. You know about the loaded boot? Loaded boot, yeah, it had mercury in it.
Oh.
Tapped the boot. Yeah, man, it was mercury. Anyway, I mean, that was the exciting dynamics of the tag team. You could do switches as mass tag team. You could do various things, come in and outside the ring. They all worked together.
And we'll talk about the evolution of tag team wrestling as it relates from then to now, but it's safe to say that tag team wrestling, there was an emphasis on it early on, and especially for some of the bigger main event angles like you're talking about with the Funks and the Von Brauners, but tag team wrestling was important to territory wrestling.
At one time, it was very important to territory wrestling, especially in the Carolinas, I believe in Portland, Oregon. Some of the smaller territories, but there were other places where it wasn't so emphasized. But yes, tag team wrestling was when you had one guy who might not have been a strong enough draw or strong enough personality on his own. You put him with another fellow who might not have been strong enough to stand on his own, but you put them together and they make that dynamic happen. Example, the Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, Rockabilly and Jesse James.
Right.
But you put them together and they just had that certain dynamic and that charisma and that spark that alone they didn't have, but together you just made that magic. And that's a way to work.
Sticking with the family theme for just a moment, you talked about the Funks. How about the Briscoes, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, as a tag team? They both found individual success, but as a tag team, talk about the Briscoes.
Well, again, Jack and Jerry Briscoe were two tremendous amateur wrestlers from Oklahoma, and they were close as brothers, and they loved professional wrestling. They watched Danny Hodge, they watched Lou Thesz, their idols growing up. And when they got in professional wrestling together as a team, they knew how to work together. And it goes back to knowing what the other one's thinking before he thinks it, and having that same pattern. Every time they went to the ring, the Briscoes could have that match with anybody because they understood what it took. You can't just put four guys in a ring and make it happen. But the Briscoe brothers knew how to do that with anybody, and that's why they were in demand all over the country.
Right. And how special is it to take two guys who are great individual singles wrestlers, put them together in a tag team environment and still be just as good.
Well, they don't. I think the idea doing that is not to be just as good, but to be even better than they were at our singles.
Right.
So it's happened many times in Charlotte. It's happened in Portland, but the most recent obviously happened in WWE. You're looking for that dynamic, and in Charlotte in the 60s and 70s, and even in the 80s, with Rock and Roll Midnight, the tag team spotlight was in the main event. But you had those dynamic workers, you had those dynamic personalities, and that's what it takes. So I think the idea was to get the most out of everybody you had on the card, and that's what it takes.
So you mentioned some of the tag teams you saw growing up. Just we'll get into specifics on Rock and Roll Midnight and stuff like that. But name some other just from around the country. We talked about Texas obviously already. Talk about some of the tag teams like in Portland, for example.
I believe Moondog Mayne and Dutch Savage were tag team, two guys who had feuded with each other and then finally got together. I'm trying to think of Moondog, Roddy Piper and Moondog Mayne. Roddy Piper and Buddy Rose, Rip Oliver's clan, Rip Oliver and the Assassin, Dave Sierra. They had this, again, connection with fans because every time they stepped in the ring, either a singles or a tag team, they produced action, and they had that intangible it factor, whether they caused the fans to love or hate them. They wanted to watch them wrestle. When I was in Oregon, I tagged with Pat Sawyer, Brett Sawyer, and it was that Brett had been there before, but it was that connection that Brett and I had. We looked similar, we had the same style. Wrestling against a guy like Rip Oliver and the Assassin, it had that dynamic feel to it because the people knew Rip and the Assassin were capable wrestlers. They didn't know what Brett and I were capable of doing until we got in the ring and showed them. So Oregon was a wrestling territory. Oregon was one of those places that people want to see action more than just size and larger than life. Carolina was the same way. Rip Hawk, Sweet Hansen, the Anderson brothers, the Assassins, the Spoilers. Those were men who understood that, wrestling one-on-one is great, but when you have a partner with you, you got to remember you have a partner. You got to remember the concept of the match changes. Make sure that everybody sees some action. Make sure that everybody stands out. Not always easy to do.
Do you think, just to kind of put you on the spot, I know it's two different animals, but do you think, do you buy into tag team wrestling being easier than a singles?
No, I don't think so at all. I think tag team wrestling, again, is not, I don't know if it's easier, but it's definitely a lot more dynamics involved because, I won't do this, but if you throw a manager in the mix, then it adds even more to it. But just a simple tag, there is no simple tag team matches, but
But
a basic tag team match is laid out, telling a story, and all matches are telling a story. I don't know that it's any easier using a tag team match. It might be easier for the people in the ring because you can tag your partner, but even in a tag team match, there is no such thing as resting on the apron. You should be working the apron the whole time, cheering for your partner, being into the match. So there is no easy way about it.
Sticking with thinking about tag teams out in the territories, how about Florida? Can you think of some good tag teams out in Florida?
Mike Graham, Steve Kern, Kevin Sullivan, Mark Lewin, Kevin Sullivan and Mike Graham, Eddie Graham and Boris Malenko, again, two foes who became tag team partners. Florida was another territory that was a wrestling territory. Eddie Graham wanted credibility. He wanted real wrestlers, so to speak. He wanted guys that, when people watched them in the ring, there was no doubt that they were tough. They were tough guys. And various tag teams, I know the Assassins wrestled in Florida, the Kentuckians, Grizzly Smith and Luke Brown. Yeah, the southern states have a lot of great tag teams because the South is known for wrestling or wrestling.
Right. And jumping over to the Memphis territory, some excellent tag team wrestling there.
Well, Jerry Lawler and Jim White, before Dundee came on scene, and A lot of people don't remember that, but Sam Bass managing Lawler and Jim White. Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee, again, two foes, two guys who feuded together forever. We put them together, and there's that dynamic, Lawler and Dundee. There could be friction there. There could be fireworks. There could be something that could happen any night of the week. The Fantastics, the Fabulous Ones, and, of course, the genesis of the Rock and Roll Express. So Memphis was a curious territory in the sense that people knew when they were being entertained. People knew when they saw something special. The Fabulous Ones, Steve Keirn and Stan Lane, really popped that territory. And Keirn was on his own road, and Lane was on his own road. But boy, Jerry Jarrett put them together, and there was magic. Because by themselves, they weren't really doing a whole lot. But man, you put them together and put Jackie Fargo with them, the Fabulous One, Jackie Fargo, a legend in that part of the country. That is what put Steve and Stan on the map.
Right. And it's an interesting story how rock and roll ended up leaving Memphis. They were kind of on the B shows, I guess, as to where the Fabulous Ones were on. I guess you call those the A shows. Rock and roll were on the B shows. Then rock and roll ends up going to Mid-South from there, right?
Correct.
As part of a trade. And it skyrocketed.
Well, yeah, that was kind of a unique deal because Mid-South Wrestling had always been a big man's territory. Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, that area. And it was one of those things where business had been slacking off in the early 80s. Bill Watts was looking for some advice or something different from Jerry Jarrett. Bill came in and watched the Memphis show, and Jarrett offered him these talents and brought him to Louisiana. And it was I think it was an overnight change, man. It went from these huge monsters to Ricky and Robert versus Dennis and Bobby with Jim Cornette. Right. So you had the Rock and Roll versus Midnight, and those guys. I mean, it was something new, and that was in the early '80s. That was when the styles started changing, and the business was starting to really change. Right. And Stan and Steve, I think, went to Minneapolis. Excuse me, Minneapolis. Not too long after that. So I mean, yeah. It was definitely a change in tide, if you will.
Something that sticks out to me as we're talking about these teams and these places that is kind of gone these days. We're talking about families, real families, Funks, Briscoes, Von Erichs. We're talking about real families, real brothers, real sons and fathers. And that's kind of died off.
There is still. I know that Kevin Von Erich's sons, Marshall and I'm not sure of this other son's name, it escapes me right now, but his sons are getting a look right now with WWE, or will be getting a look shortly. I know they've been wrestling on and off. And
that's kind of the difference, though, right? They're going to get a look.
Yes.
We may never, you might have just said their name for the last time. We may never, but then it was, they're there.
Well, yeah, but again, it's like the business was a completely different animal back then. Right. And there's not really a place to go to where your father can run the territory, own the territory, unless you're Vince McMahon. Right. And that's just pretty much an unheard of thing to happen today.
Well, let's not shy away from it any longer. Let's talk about Rock and Roll at Midnight and how they revolutionized tag team wrestling.
Well, once again, you're talking about 4 individual wrestlers who brought together by a promoter, brought together by circumstances maybe, and it was magic. Ricky Morton, prior to being teamed with Robert Gibson, had actually been a top guy in places like Texas, which used main eventers, and this was prior to their run in Louisiana. But Ricky actually had matches against Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA Championship in Houston, and wrestled main events in San Antonio and some of the major markets. But then went back home to Memphis and was just on the card and working mid to upper.
Lost in the shuffle.
Lost in the shuffle, yeah. And we all know how that goes. But Ricky and Robert, as a tag team, one night, saw the promoters, Jarrett, Lawler, Dundee, they all saw a spark. They saw something. And that translated into the second team babyface. Again, you had the Fabulous Ones here and Rock and Roll here. Then you had Bobby Eaton, who was a great singles competitor, and Dennis Condrey, who had already been in one
Phil
version, yes, with the Midnight Express with Randy Rose and Norma Lost. So while you're sailing along sometimes on the same ocean, you just have different ships and different paths. But when someone brings you together and just see the dynamic, Bobby Eaton is one of the greatest wrestlers, greatest performers, greatest workers ever in this business. Dennis Condrey, I know from experience, is one of the greatest workers, wrestlers, performers in this business. Same can be said for Ricky and Robert. You put two and two together, then you add Jim Cornette to the mix, who can talk, who can antagonize and bring that emotion and feelings out of everyone. That is a match made in heaven. But you have to have everyone on the same page. And what is that page? What's the story you're trying to tell? It's about the match. It's about the emotions. It's about getting the reaction from the crowd. It's about having the crowd show up and be emotionally involved in your match. And when you had Robert and Ricky against Dennis and Bobby with Cornette ringside, they made magic. You didn't even have to say a word. There were no rehearsals. There were no, let's go over the match step by step. It was just, let's show up. Let's go out. Let's feel it. Let's hear it. Let's listen. Let's try it. And that's what was so great about those guys. The Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, I don't know how many times they won Match of the Year, Tag Team of the Year. Ricky and Robert were known as the Tag Team of the 80s.
Right.
And they're still going strong today. Over 30 years of being a team. I mean, yes, it's a long time, and yes, they're not as young as they once were, but they're still a team, and they're still legendary for what they did.
Yeah, and those matches are still being talked about today.
Yeah,
By
and
people who weren't alive.
well, they're a great study for anybody who wants to watch tag team wrestling. You watch the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express. Watch the story being told. Watch the way they laid out the match. Watch the way it unfolded. Watch how it happened. It was impromptu. It was feeling. It wasn't A, B, C, D, E.
I've actually heard Jim Cornette describe being at ringside was like being an air traffic controller.
Yes.
Because Jimmy would have just as much a role in calling out the spots and so forth and so on, and a final role in that.
Well, I know we're going to probably get into this in a couple weeks, but I'll save most of it. But I will say that Jim Cornette is a genius when it comes to not just tag team wrestling, but laying out wrestling in general.
Did Rock and Roll Midnight do, and I think I know the answer I'm asking, is did they do bigger business with that in Charlotte than they did in Mid-South, and why?
I don't know if it was bigger business money-wise.
More notable.
More notable was with Charlotte because I believe Superstation, and they were more recognized, obviously. So, but Louisiana, they were red hot. They were doing business that Watts, I think, couldn't believe. Well, no, I know he couldn't believe it. And I do remember when I went back after the Rock and Roll and Midnight run was just about over. I went back on the tail end and started working in Louisiana and Houston. And Paul Bosch, the promoter in Houston, my mentor, actually told me that they made over $1 million in Houston alone. And that was in, again, mid-'80s. So, and he never believed they could make $1 million. That's in one town.
How much of that went into the FIA account?
I'm sure there was a lot, so if they showed that on the books, then I'm sure that Paul made sure that he was very well taken care of.
Can you remember there being animosity from maybe the top guys or the heavyweight guys or the guys involved in the other programs against Ricky and Robert against Midnight for the types of matches they were in?
I don't know if there was animosity or jealousy if they weren't working with him. Because you had guys like Ted DiBiase and Dr. Death, Steve Williams, who loved working with Ricky and Robert because they were making money. And the pros know that if you're making money with these guys, then you need to take care of them. And you're not, I don't think the animosity was there per se because they were getting the top spot. That Ricky and Robert were getting the top spot. I think the animosity might have come from not being able to have that top spot with Ricky and Robert, because they were the ones who drew the money. It was the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express who actually turned things around in Louisiana.
I want to ask you this, since you said you'll answer anything.
Sure.
Let's settle a debate here, or an age-old question. Ricky and Robert together, the Rock and Roll Express, one of the most legendary tag teams, as we mentioned, and still talk about today, still at it today. Therefore, for just a moment in time, they weren't together. Not necessarily that they broke up, but Ricky had his run with Ric Flair and the match for the title and so forth and so on. They ended up always coming back together. Could Ricky have been any more successful by himself than he was with Robert? Just like we saw years later with Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. And that's something they get compared to a lot. But I'd just like to get your opinion. Do you think Ricky would have went on to superstardom as compared to what he did achieve?
My opinion is this about Ricky and Robert. In the 80s, it was a great time. And the Rock and Roll Express were a huge part of wrestling's popularity. In the NWA, they were very, very, very successful. They were notorious for being the Rock and Roll Express and rock and roll lifestyle, and rock this and rock that. We were party all night long. Ricky Morton is and was a great performer. So was Robert Gibson. Could Ricky have gone on to greater heights? I believe anything is possible, but I also believe that there are some things that we all look back on it and we say, maybe we shouldn't have done that because we could have done this. Yes, yes. And that happened to a lot of us in the 80s where we were having a really great time and it's never going to end and we're just going to keep on going and it will never, never, never end. Well, it sometimes does.
Right.
And Ricky had great success, but we all get older. And sometimes people don't want to see the older version of what we once were, and that goes with everyone, not just Rock and Roll Express,
Right.
but I do think Ricky would have been successful. He could have been more successful. Who knows? We can't turn back the hands of time,
Right.
but I do know that there was a lot of things in the 80s that we all look back and say, damn, we had a great time, but.
Right. What could have been? Well, that's a question that'll probably live on.
Sure.
Before we wrap up on Rock and Roll at Midnight, so, you talk about Bobby being the greatest, or one of the greatest, excuse me, and Dennis as well. How about Stan? Stan comes later and fits into that equation seamlessly, it felt like.
Yeah, by all means, and I'm a huge Stan Lane fan. I've always said that. I've always been a Stan Lane fan. And while Stan gets a lot of credit, I don't think Stan Lane gets the credit he deserves because he did come in and keep the Midnight going seamlessly. And he worked so well with the Rock and Roll Express. So, and Stan, let me say this, when Dennis left, Stan came in and added a whole new element, especially in the 80s, a no cosmetic look. Dennis was great, no doubt about it, but Dennis had been wrestling for a while then,
Right.
too. And while Dennis was, nickname was Loverboy Dennis Conry.
Right.
Well, Sweet Stan Lane was definitely Sweet Stan Lane, and Stan looked the part, was the part, and I think I don't think Stan gets the credit he deserves because he was, I believe Stan was one of the greatest too.
And I just have to point this out about Dennis. For the folks at home that a lot of people watching this that weren't maybe not live or weren't privy to these matches and this feud. When we say Dennis left, he left. I mean, we live in an age where we have instant communication with each other, cell phones, Facebook, social media. Dennis Condrey left, not to be heard from for however long, right in the middle of a pretty successful tag team run with Midnight Express. What kind of impact did that have on his team, the other guys?
Well, once again, I think for the short run, maybe an impact, but the long run, it really didn't impact it at all.
Right.
I mean,
They plug Stan in.
Huh?
They put Stan right in.
Right. I mean, if you want to talk about impact, it impacted Stan Lane more than it impacted Dennis Confrey because for whatever reason Dennis left. It's his business and it's his reasons, and anyone who knows, and anyone who doesn't need to know. But the fact is, you can't do that and not expect
someone else to step up.
You can't say, well, you step in and you act like you won the Super Bowl. Well, hey man, you did win the Super Bowl because you left. And Stan came right in and just seamlessly got right in and didn't miss a beat. And it was, again, knowing how your opponent's going to react, knowing how your partner's going to react. And Stan was so good at that. He and Steve Kern were one of the greatest tag teams of all time, the fabulous ones. And they did business in Memphis, and they did business in Minneapolis. But yeah, I don't think Stan missed a beat, and I don't think the Rock and Roll Express complained one bit. Later on, Dennis came back and explained his reasons for leaving, and all was fine and good.
The Midnight against Midnight feud was awesome.
Yeah. Right.
You had Paul Heyman in the mix and the bloody white tuxedo, Jim Cornette. I mean, that was great television.
And if anybody out there doesn't know what you're talking about, I'm sure you can Google that on YouTube as well, because those were things that were very creative and innovative during that time, and it was real, but it was how real was it? Well, it was a lot more real than people want to realize.
Right.
And want to accept, because the animosity of someone coming in and taking your place, even though you might have left, well wait a minute, where's that resentment come from, and is it justified? And what a better way to put it on screen to have people ask the same question.
And not to get off on a tangent on this, but again, we're living in an age where if, let's say Rock and Roll Midnight took place today, Dennis decides to leave, well, he's on Twitter 3 hours after he leaves the building, and the people can get a hold of him. Back then, no, he's gone. There's no instant access to him. So when he's gone, he's gone. When he comes back, out of nowhere, the people are shocked, and then they fall right into Midnight versus Midnight. And that's just something that made back then so different.
Yeah, and it was such a different animal back then. It was so much better. I don't want to say easier, but in my opinion, it was so much better to dive into and get lost in the storyline or get lost in the happenings that either were or weren't really happening backstage. Because these days, everyone wants to know what's going on backstage and the intricate dealings of the business. Well, back then, it was a little more mysterious.
So let's talk about a team that brought reality to the ring every time they stepped in between the ropes. They were believable, incredible, just about every other word you want to describe the Road Warriors, Hawk and
Two
Animal.
guys who probably were the most dangerous when they started, and they didn't care. And Ole Anderson didn't care. And nobody cared because they looked so menacing and intimidating. But they learned along the way how to do business that best suited the Road Warriors. And Hawk and Animal, to this day, I think, are two of the most copied and revered tag teams that ever was. And that was, back in the 80s and 90s?
Right.
Two big bouncers from Minnesota that were big and bad, didn't care, and could really stomp your ass if they wanted to. But they also understood that if you're going to make money in wrestling, not everybody's going to want to go out there and get a concussion every night. So eventually they had to learn that as a business, to be the Road Warriors and to be as intimidating as they really, really were, they had to come up with ideas. And they had to come up with alternatives than just going in there and clotheslining their opponent and having the match end in 10 seconds. Because that, you can only see that so many times.
Sure.
So they came up with ways, and they came up with ideas. So that's why when they wrestled Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, or any combination of the four horsemen, it was a credible match, and you got to see those guys. And that's why a lot of big guys today think all they have to go out there and do is squash somebody, and that gets them over.
Right.
Well, that's how you initially get over, but eventually you have to learn how to work and how to tell the story. And that's what I think the Road Warriors were so great at, was learning to adapt, and learning how to be powerful and intimidating at the same time. Learning how to get 15 minutes as opposed to 15 seconds.
And just from a performer standpoint, as a wrestler, can you describe, and I've heard others do it, but what's it like to be standing in the ring and the lights go off and Iron Man hits and the Road Warriors are about to make their way down the aisle for the fans at home, but can you put them in the wrestler's shoes? I mean, because even if you're friends with Hawk and Animal, it's still got to be an intimidating.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter if you're friends, it doesn't matter if you're partners, it doesn't matter if you're just an acquaintance. Once that Iron Man hits, once that music hits, all bets are off, and they become the Road Warriors,
Right.
and they're Hawk and Animal.
Right.
And that's what you have to keep in mind. You're going to be in a physical match. There's no other way to explain it,
Right.
except you know it's coming, and you either brace yourself or you don't. And I prefer to brace myself because that's what's going to happen.
Do you have any personal memories for you working?
I never had the opportunity to wrestle against Road Warriors. I think I was very fortunate. But knowing Hawk and Animal both, Hawk especially was such a different persona than what he portrayed in public.
Right.
He was such a great guy, and Animal was the same way. But it was an intensity that they brought from backstage to the front.
Right.
They understood when they're in front of the people, they're in front of the fans, they have to be the Road Warriors, and Hawk was probably the best at it.
Do you think that was a team that, and you hear over the years different stories, but that was a team that Vince McMahon really couldn't wait to get his hands on, or do you think?
No, I think so. I think Vince knew that they were money, and they were, because he made Demolition in the form of the Road Warriors. But when the Warriors came to New York as the Legion of Doom, he put Paul Ellering with him, with Rocco and things like that. So he wanted to add his own dimension to the Road Warriors. He wanted to add his own spin. And for whatever reason, and Vince has his own reasons, and not everyone can figure him out in the end, but at the same time, I think, I know Vince saw money in the Road Warriors. He saw money in the team. He saw money in the concept. These two huge guys who were ass kickers for real coming to the WWF at the time.
When you couple that with Vince's just marketing machine, and it goes back to my childhood, and I see the kids with the shoulder pads and the spikes and the face paint, the t-shirts. Legion of Doom, Road Warriors and WWF were a match made in heaven at that point early on.
Yeah, by all means, and it is about marketing. I mean, for me, when I first started wrestling, it was all about wrestling, and then all of a sudden you learn that no, they want to see the spikes, they want to see the chains, they want to see the outfit. It's the armor, it's what you wear, man. It is perception.
Who you are, basically.
Yes.
So switching gears a little bit, heading into WWF, and I think this is a tag team division that maybe doesn't get its just due sometimes when you're talking about the history of tag team wrestling. But that late '80s, early '90s, really late '80s, WWF tag team division, the British Bulldogs, the Hart Foundation, Killer Bees. Talk about that era and those matches, because those are different. And just to put in perspective for people at home, let's say you have Hogan and whoever on top, but maybe right before intermission or right before that match, you've got the Hart Foundation of the British Bulldogs doing stuff that had never been seen before.
Yeah, the tag team division was probably its highest back then, especially the Hart Foundation and the Bulldogs. Dynamite Kid was one of the most talented junior heavyweights at that time. He brought a new style to the business in the early '80s. He and Davey Boy, they had this powerful persona and this image, and for the guys who were wrestling them, they understood Dynamite's sense of humor was a little bit off, let's say. Yeah, and then couple that with Davey Boy and his power, and
Davey Boy also had a little bit of a sense of humor.
Davey had a little bit of a different view of life. Yes, he did. But then you couple that with Brett and
Jim Neidhart.
Jim Neidhart. Thank you. You know, all four of those guys knew each other from the Calgary territory, and they wrestled so many times before. But I mean, that was just such a time for tag teams. I'm trying to think who else. You said the Killer Bees, but there were other teams in that era that really stood out because it was a chance to shine, and it was a chance, again, back then, it was two guys who they didn't have faith in necessarily to get over on their own. Put them together, see what they can do. Usually one guy's going to outshine the other,
Right.
Sean or Marty.
Right. Sean Marty.
Yes, and the other guy will go over here or whatever happens. But at that time, you had guys who were pretty equal and guys who embraced the tag team form of wrestling, which is a lot different.
And they were smaller too, just to put it out there, than a lot of what you've gotten used to seeing from WWF. So completely different stuff.
At that time, yeah, and I think through the years, WWE now has found out that it's not always the bigger is better.
Right.
You're looking at the sleeker, more dynamic athlete these days, and they can be in singles competition. A guy like Seth Rollins and Brock Lesnar are two different animals, but they can wrestle each other and still be credible. And of course, you can also put tag teams together, like a Luke Harper and an Eric Rowan or Bray Wyatt. So I mean, it's just that personality. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the dog.
Sean and Marty, the Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. Were you around them much when they were the Rockers?
No, not much. I was around them a little bit in Alabama and up in New York for a little bit, but not as much.
Okay, well, let's just say as a historian of some sorts, do you think people saw Sean's ability to turn into what he did? Or
People as far as The Office?
let's
Or
just
fans?
let's say The Office.
Okay. What a lot of times what was going to make the difference with a tag team and The Office is you're going to have one a little more ambitious than the other. Because Marty, in my opinion, Marty Jannetty is just as talented as Shawn Michaels. Very, very equal in talent and very, very capable. But Shawn was very ambitious and very forthright in his wanting everyone to know that he's a single superstar. He wanted to be the champion. He wanted to be the guy. He wanted to be the man. And Marty, I think, was just wanted to be there and wrestle and do his thing.
So what's funny is I'm drawing a parallel between that and what we talked about earlier with rock and roll. As the man, that was great and that was an awesome ride, but
what if? Right. Yeah, and I think Marty now probably knows. He probably knew it then, but some guys are a little more comfortable going in and being boisterous and not too shy about saying what they want. But not everyone is, and some guys are just happy to be there and be in that tag team spot or be in their spot. I mean, but other guys and the ambitious and guys with the attitude that want to.
Is that a whatever it takes type?
Whatever it takes, yeah.
Situation.
By all means. And Sean did whatever it takes. There's no doubt. You can't discount Sean's talent.
Absolutely. Yeah. A little bit later on, we'll talk. Right now, a little bit later on, mid to late '90s tag teams. I've just got some examples here. We're going to move into some WCW teams. Looking at guys like Harlem Heat, Steiner Brothers, which Steiner's obviously not just in WCW. They had success much earlier than that. But, talk about those mid to late '90s teams. Harlem Heat, for example. What was your impression of Harlem Heat as far as their place in tag team?
Well, that's a great thing, man. I knew Harlem Heat, actually Booker T and Stevie Ray when they were with Ivan Putski in Houston. And they started out, and Booker actually started out as G.I. Bro. Later on, as G.I. Bro, but he started out. And then
G.I. Bro is a great name.
It is great. But Harlem Heat, when they formed a team in WCW, once again, Stevie Ray was talented, but Booker was head and shoulders above his brother. And it was obvious that Booker was going to be the guy who stood out. And he did. Booker stood out because he could break dance, he could talk. but he took his craft seriously. And I think that goes back to a lot of his life experiences. He was bound and determined to be successful, and that's what he wound up doing. So Harlem Heat was a great team, but you could see that there was going to be a break.
And you really can see, if you go back and watch, you can see Booker stands out just a little bit more and a little bit more as time goes on.
Yeah.
That's a great point. How about the Steiner brothers?
The Steiner brothers, again, they were along the signs, along the lines, let me say this, of the road warriors, and the fact that, yeah, these were two big, bad, intimidating guys. Now, I did get to wrestle the Steiner brothers on more than one occasion, and they were powerful, and they were certainly opinionated, and if they didn't like something, they just did whatever they wanted, and that was just the way it was.
I don't think that's changed much.
Not at all, not one bit. And that's okay because that's what you had to do. And they were successful, both Rick and Scott, in singles and tag team combinations because they had that attitude. They were both athletes from that very young age, competitive, and it didn't matter who they were in or against, they were going to be competitive and prove that they were top guys.
Another team from that era, which is interesting, I wanted to bring them up because not so much for their matches or their wrestling ability, but just their importance of that time in wrestling is Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
Ooh. Well, once again, a lot of people want to know what goes on behind the scenes. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were very, very close. Of course, everyone knows about the Clique. But you have to look at those guys as two of the biggest, the best big men in the business. Maybe not the greatest technical wrestlers or workers ever, and that's okay. They drew money and they drew interest. So without Kevin Nash or Scott Hall, there would be no NWO.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and that would have changed the course of wrestling history.
Right, and they changed the course of wrestling history as it was.
Absolutely. A little bit further down the line, just talking about the early 2000s, the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, of course, in WWE. Let me ask you this. Hardys and Edge and Christian, they almost had their own version of Rock and Roll Midnight, would you say?
By all means.
But do you think, okay, 30 years later, we're sitting here talking about Rock and Roll Midnight, as do many wrestling fans, but can you say the same for those matches that, like Hardys and Edge and Christian had? Will they stand the test of time?
Yeah, you have to throw the Dudley Boys in because they did tables, ladders, and chairs. They did the tables matches. They did those ladder matches. One of the most enduring, I think, scenes is Edge spearing Jeff Hardy off that ladder. You know, it's a hellacious bump. It's a spectacular looking bump, and they did some stuff that hadn't been done before.
Ever.
Yeah, ever. And I do believe the younger fans and historians will remember and recall. You have to. If you're a student of the game and you love professional wrestling, then you have to watch the Edge and Christians, the Hardys, the Dudleys, the Rock and Roll, the Midnights. You have to. They had matches that were as close to perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect match, but as close to perfect as it gets.
And one that sticks out to me is Madison Square Garden. I think it was Royal Rumble. I think it might have been all three of those teams: Hardys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudleys. And,
Yeah.
I mean, jumping off the top of Madison Square Garden and the ladders and the tables. Did you ever see that taking place in WWE? Now, could you have forecasted that? I mean,
Not without those guys, no, because the Hardy Boys were so far. When they used to come in and do enhancement matches,
sure.
I would see these guys do incredible bumps and just different than anybody else who did an enhancement match. They just made everything they did look really good, better than the other guys.
Right.
And I said one time to Kevin Kelly, Jeff was going to kill himself one time, and Kevin said, "It looks like he's trying to get a job." And it's true. That's what they were trying to do. They were going out there and they were doing things that nobody else would do, and they got themselves over. So when the Hardy Boys came into the mix, and they got with Edge and Christian, again, two young guys, and the Dudley Boys still had that fire and that hunger. That was just, again, that synergy between those three teams to be able to make that magic happen, and they really did.
Being in the developmental system, being a coach at WWE, like, how does it come about that we're going to put these two together and they're going to be a tag team and it's going to work? You know what I mean?
You don't always say it. You don't always know that. You don't always.
But
say
are
that.
you told that by, say you're a coach, did someone come to you from above and say, we're going to put these two guys together, this is what you've got to work with?
Not always. Sometimes, a lot of times, it was just us. It was us putting them together and seeing if there was anything there. But then you would have other people come in and say, "Oh, again, what do you think about that right together, right there, huh? What about that, Johnny?" I'll say, "That'd be great."
Tag team wrestling. Well, before today's tag, well, teams that stick out to you today. I'm just asking you.
Wow.
And it doesn't have to be anywhere.
No, I understand. I totally understand what you're saying. But talking about earlier, two guys on an individual course, you put them together and see what's happening. My opinion of Tyson Kidd and Cesaro. Tyson Kidd has always, in my opinion, been one of those guys who's been underutilized and just hasn't had his potential tapped. He's one of those people, he's one of those guys who loves wrestling. He just loves wrestling. He doesn't love politics. He doesn't love into that. Yeah, exactly. And Cesaro, I think, is the same way. But you put them together, and I think these days, people are seeing that they're very talented individuals as a team. The Usos are brothers. They have that family connection. They're exciting to watch, and they're exciting in their entrance. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the other teams. You had Miz and Mizdow who have broken up since then, but it's that entertainment value that everyone's looking for because you don't want to watch oatmeal on TV. Tyson Kidd and Cesaro are two exciting wrestlers that they're given the chance and the opportunity and the free reign to do so. For whatever reason, if people don't gravitate towards them, well, then you have to change it. But I think given the opportunity, given the chance more so, you're going to see people gravitate towards.
What is tag team wrestling's place right now in professional wrestling? Is it anywhere close to what it was? And I know it's not.
No, it's not. And nowhere near. There's not an emphasis on it because there's not really anyone that I see any of the major companies get behind and care about. And I don't believe the personalities in the teams warrant that as well. You have to have at least one of the people, and this from experience. You know, when we had managers, when I had Jim Cornette as a manager, I didn't have to do any of the grunt work because Cornette was the guy going in saying he was the pitch man. He would pitch the ideas. But if you don't have that, then it's got to be at least a lead guy on the team going in pitching.
I mean, is it safe to say that you've got to be, as a tag team wrestler, as unselfish in terms of being willing to give up a little, half the spotlight, right? I mean, because otherwise it might not work.
Well, half as selfish or even more selfish because, again, you have one guy going to get over, the other guy's going to get left behind. But if you really want to be with your partner for a long time, then you have to learn how that works. Again, the Usos are brothers, so they're going to be a cohesive unit, I would think. But brothers fight too. The Cesaros and Tyson Kidds of the world, I think, know that their run as a tag team is going to be for a limited amount of time. So they're going to want to get over, I think, as an individual, while they're tag team champions, while they're still a tag team, for when that run ends and splits, kind of like Miz and Mizdow did. That was going to be a short run. It was a good run, but eventually that's going to have to leave because you can't have Mizdow forever. You're going to have to go back to something. So,
my last question for you on the subject of tag team wrestling: your favorite partner? Wow, I know they were all different.
Yeah, they were all different. Oh man, my favorite partner. I've got to say, just for the fact that as a team, there never was. I never had an issue. I never had a crossword. Never had any problems with Stanley. Jimmy Del Rey was a great partner in different elements, different ways, but Stan was one of those guys who made a bad night a great night. And it never seemed like a dull moment either. So, I have to go Stan Lane, the next would have to be Jim Del Rey.
All right. Well, thanks for answering that and everything else I asked you.
Well,
Tom,
we're going to do it again sometime.
We're going to wrap. Oh, we're going to do it again. Don't you worry. We're going to wrap this up. Want to talk about a few things. As always, you can catch us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, our own website, theofficevisit.com, as well as logansworldtv.com. You'll be able to digitally download our shows, our episodes, along with access to our merchandise. And I just happen to have a brand new edition of the Office Visit t-shirt with Dr. Tom's mug right there on the front of it. It says, "This may hurt a bit." For some people watching this, it just might. We've got the t-shirt available. Also, when I'm here, I've got Dr. Tom's book, A Complete One-Year Training Curriculum and Guide for Beginners and Seasoned Pros. Professional Wrestling. You can have access to the book, t-shirts, DVDs, and much more on the website. Dr. Tom, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you very much.
And we will have more of the Office Visit. Stay tuned to Logan's World, logansworldtv.com. Until next time, for Dr. Tom, I'm Matt McCormick, and this has been another great episode, the kickoff of Season 2 of the Office Visit.